Hello, today's video is about this Yamaha Neo 50 scooter. It's been sat unused for a couple of years now, and I'm going to be putting it back into use, getting it ready for the MOT test, which is an annual safety test that we have here in the UK. So we're going to go over sort of basic safety checks, then checking it from an MOT point of view, and then just doing other things that you'd really want to do to keep something like this in good condition and working well. It's been sitting under a tarpaulin outside for, as I said, at least 2 years, so there's going to be a bit of work to do probably. I've already taken the cover off, taken the battery out and charged that up just to see if we can get any life out of that. So let's get started. I'll just show you around it in a bit more detail. So this is a Yamaha Neo YN50R. It's a 2001 model. It's done, let's see how many miles it's done. It's done 12,518 miles. The last MOT expired. They need to be done every year in case you're not familiar with them, and it expired in 2017. So we're going to go over it from a point of view of safety checks first of all, and then give it a check pretty much equivalent, apart from things like the brake test, which I can't really do here properly, equivalent of an MOT inspection, with the hope that when we take it for the MOT it'll pass first time. And then also things that we do, just best practice in terms of maintenance, things that you do to keep something like this running well, keep it enjoyable to ride. So I'm talking about things like, you know, the little things that you notice, like lubricating the control cables, or all that sort of thing. We're going to check the steering, the suspension, wheels and tyres, brakes, and I could tell already pushing it into the garage it's got what happens very commonly with the disc brakes on motorbikes is that they're binding. It's really difficult to push into the garage, so I think we're going to need to do some work on the brakes, probably rebuild the caliper if past experience is anything to go by, but let's see how we get on. I'm going to check the rear brake, going to check the drive belt as well, and the other components of the final drive, check the engine and exhaust system, check the oil feeds working properly. It's probably going to need some fresh fuel. Item 1, don't think that's quite how a wing mirror is supposed to be. Could be a good indicator, but yeah, probably need to tighten that up. Item 2 is that when you put the key in, it's supposed to release the seat, so you can get underneath to check the fuel, well, to put fuel in and to put two-stroke oil in as well, and the seat, bless it, is not releasing. So yeah, let's have a bit more of a look at that first, shall we, because I can't start the engine until I can check it's got two-stroke oil in it. Haha, a simple fix. Don't know why that wasn't happening before, but anyway, it wasn't, and now it is. So I'll take that. Okay, so lovely bit of cobweb and mould under there. So this fuel's probably going to be quite stale. Not much to see in there. It is fairly full actually. Maybe it's been topped up more recently than I think. Oil. Not a lot to see down there. What I'm planning on doing, I wouldn't really run a 4-stroke engine on engine oil that was 3 years old, so I don't see why we would with a 2-stroke either. So what I'm planning on doing is draining the 2-stroke oil out and replacing it with some fresh stuff, which I've ordered. Just looking down here, you can see that looks rather wet, so I don't know whether there's a 2-stroke oil leak or whether it's just been spilled when it was being topped up, but we'll have a bit more of a look into that as well. So let's move on to the wheels and tyres. This one's got plenty of tread. What we're also looking for is perishing. You can quite often get around this area in particular. While you're here, give it a spin, check for play. There's a minute amount of play that I can feel there. You probably can't tell from the video. I don't think that's anything to worry about, but I'll have a look. While we're here as well, a good thing to look at is, don't know if I'm going to be able to get my camera in. with a light. Can you see that? Ooh dear, yeah. So these are worth checking. I don't know if you can see, I think you can, the crack in that is knackered. That needs changing, because what happens with that is as things get hot and over time, I know you could say it isn't going to get particularly hot because it can only do 30 miles an hour, but nonetheless, as it gets hot over time, that just gets worse and it starts letting air out, and then you have a deflating tyre. So that tyre needs to come off so we can put a new valve on it. Let's go over to the front. Looking at the tread on this one now, unlike cars and larger motorbikes, for 50cc scooters, all the MOT requires, if it hasn't changed since I last looked, was that it has to have visible tread across the entire surface, which this tyre has. But it's really old, and it is starting to crack. Don't know if you can see out there, it's very minor, but it is starting to crack. I'm just trying to see the date on this tyre. There we go. So it's upside down, but this tyre, that says 2500. And that means that this tyre was made in the 25th week of the year 2000. So this is the tyre that's been on the scooter since it was new. It feels, you can't really tell, but it feels horrible. It feels rock solid. It feels like it's way beyond the end of its life. So it's going to have a new front tyre. If we look at the valve, ooh, it's also, is that focusing? It's also going to be having a new valve. So we've got to take the tyre off anyway, so it's having a new front tyre. That is knackered as well. Okay, so I've put it on some blocks of wood under the centre stand, and that's to lift it up. So there's more clearance under the wheels so that we can rock it backwards and forwards. And the reason we want to rock it backwards and forwards is so that we can very carefully chop the front up to take the weight off the front, so that we can check the steering head bearings first of all. What I'm doing here is just feeling for any sort of crunching as we go through the full steering axis, also any pinching of cables or anything like that. That's moving really freely. You can see the wing mirror, bless it, is flapping around in the breeze as well. What I'm doing, in case you can't tell, is just pulling the fork legs backwards and forwards without there being any weight on the front wheel, and feeling for the head bearings, the steering head bearings, clicking or feeling for any movement. It's quite difficult to work out because when you do this, the whole bike actually moves, but I don't think I can feel any movement there. What I can tell, however, is that we've got some rusty fork legs, so let's have a look at that. So that may or may not be an MOT failure, but if it's not an MOT failure right now, what it will do is rip the fork oil seals, and then it will become an MOT failure very quickly. So this one actually looks a lot worse than this one, so maybe that's just the way it's been stored. The gold standard method, I suppose, for fixing this would be either a complete new fork piece or have it re-chromed. You can wet sand them, and given the value of this scooter, that's what I'm going to try and do first, I think, and we'll see how we get on with that. So while we're here, let's have a look at the front brake. It's good to do this with the wheel lifted off the ground, as we've just had a look at the head bearings, just so you can actually spin the wheel. Don't know if you could tell, but I could tell when I pushed it in to the garage, and I can also tell now that that front caliper is binding just a little bit. Now it's always difficult to know whether this is just something that's happened because the bike hasn't been used and it'll clear as you start riding it, or whether it'll actually get worse as you start riding it. I've had both in MOT tests before. I've had one where I thought, oh yeah, it'd be alright, and it was. Another one where it actually got hotter and it failed and I had to come back, rebuild the calipers and start again. So I'm going to try taking this caliper off, having a look, seeing what it's like when I've done that, see if it's moving freely. We need to change the brake fluid anyway because that will have been in here far too long. So we might do that as well. But if we're going to rebuild the caliper, we should obviously wait until after we've rebuilt the caliper, otherwise we'd be wasting brake fluid. So that needs to come off and we need to have a look. You see, there's also, yeah, it's freer on some parts of the disc than others, so it may be that the disc is a bit warped or the disc has been banged at some point, so we'll have to have a look at that as well. Best way of checking that might be just to ride it and see how we get on, but obviously you can't really do that without an MOT unless I ride it around the garden. Something I didn't do, just realised I didn't mention it, was check the front wheel bearing. When you've got a sticking caliper, it's not really the best time to check the bearing because the caliper gripping on the disc stops you feeling the play. So once I've taken that caliper off, that'll be an ideal time to check for any play and any noise in the front wheel bearing, because the wheel will spin freely. Okay, so let's have a look at the rear brakes. The rear brakes, as you have probably gathered, are a drum brake inside here, so adjustment on this nut down here. You just pull the lever. You can see there's a little, you might be able to see, there's a little indicator there that's supposed to move. Doesn't look to be moving particularly freely, but the aim really is that the indicator points to somewhere on here, and if the indicator gets towards that end or off that end, then your shoes are worn out and they need replacing. This one looks, aside from the fact that it's not really moving freely, it's within the zone that it should be. I can't feel any binding on the rear wheel, so I think they're probably okay. Other things to do while we're here, just have a look at the shock absorber. Looks rusty but okay, the spring's alright, I can't see any leaking of any fluid. We could test the damping of it and stuff when the bike's on the ground, but I don't really want to do that to the front suspension yet, because every time that rust goes over the seals, it's just increasing the chance that we rip one of the fork seals. So I'm not really going to do that until we've sorted out that rust on the fork legs. This cover needs to come off so I can check the drive belt. I have had a drive belt snap before as I was going along, and it's not a particularly pleasant experience, so I'll just give that a check as well. While we're here, actually, one thing I didn't mention before about the final drive, I've got a drain plug, I hope it's a drain plug anyway, just there, and the fill plug there. Always make sure you can open the fill plug before you undo the drain plug, because if you don't and you can't undo the fill plug, then you've got no oil in and no means of putting any back in. So part of the service is also going to involve changing the final drive oil. It's just a small amount of 10W30. I'll let you know how much when we come round to doing that. Okay, so time to remove some plastics. We need to, I can just have that bit off straight away because that's loose already. There we go. Start of a large pile of plastic. So that reveals obviously where the battery was. Spark plug just in there. Have some light. So the air filter is in there. We'll get to that from the other side. And then we're probably going to need a bit more space. So might take these bits off. Might need to take this out, although I'm going to try to avoid doing that. But what I am also going to need to remove is this to get to the brake fluid container, and also to get to the control cable so I can lubricate those. Probably going to take the seat off as well because it's kind of just getting in the way at the moment. Just go around the other side. So around the other side we can see there's the air filter housing just there. I think we could probably take that off without taking this plastic off, but because I'm going to want to have a look at the rest of the engine in general, and the engine's kind of in there, then I think I am going to need to take a bit more off, but let's see how we get on. Let's start undoing things. So with that under shield and plastic cover underneath off, gives us an opportunity to check under the scooter. Got a bit of surface rust there, nothing too major. You can have a better look at some leaks, better look at the exhaust system. Again, plenty of surface rust, but doesn't look to have any holes. There's that oil leak again, and it does look like it's where the two-stroke oil has just been spilt. I can also see the fuel hose behind there, so we need to take that cover off to check the fuel hose, to check it hasn't perished. So I'll look around the other side as well. So there's the air filter housing there. Again, looking for leaks and stuff like that. Chafing of cables. Just looking at the lines as well. Just find somewhere to stick my torch. No cheeky answers to that, thank you. So these two lines coming out of the tanks underneath, I haven't checked yet. I would guess that's the oil for the auto lube, and that's the fuel. But I need to go behind here to check that there. I mean, that feels all right, but it looks pretty crusty. So we just need to check that that's not perished and about to leak. We also need to follow that down to the carburetor. So we're going to keep taking some more plastics off and see what we got. It looks like this mudguard panel is just held on by two screws, one on each side. I'm leaving these connected because I want to be able to see them working. Don't really want to just leave them hanging, so I'll just get a couple of cable ties. Just quickly show you this. When I took this fairing off this side, I spotted this tube, this one here, and it goes down to here. Should clip in there, I would have thought, but it isn't at the moment. Anyway, we'll sort that out. But it isn't actually connected to anything, and I'm thinking, oh god, what on earth is going on here? But actually, it's quite simple. Move the cobwebs out of the way. Don't know if you can see, let's shine a torch on it. There's a little drain hole there, so that if you spill fuel or oil when you're filling it up, that's where it drains, or that's where it's supposed to drain. And this tube goes, you see that? It goes on there, so that's something fixed. Now I've got the side panels off, I can see how easy it's going to be to remove this helmet box just there. So I'm going to do that next. Obviously it's a Japanese motorcycle, so it's 10mm bolts. I think this is going to enable me to see the entire engine from the top. It's going to make things a lot easier. So let's do that next. Seal off the around the petrol filler. Hey, there we go. So now we get to have a proper look at it. When I told you before that that other line next to what I thought was the fuel line was for the oil for the auto lube, that was completely wrong. It is, of course, a vacuum line for an automatic fuel tap. There's the line for the oil. So we need to check that that looks alright. What I also need to do, because in taking that helmet cover off, this tank is actually now loose. So it's going to be a really good, you can see it's full actually, it's going to be a really good opportunity for me to drain it, because I'll just take it off and open that there. But I've also got to make sure that until I do take it off, I cable tie it so it doesn't fall over. So get a much better look at where the spark plug is now. Have a much better look at all the lines and the control cables, check they're all in reasonable shape. There we go, better with a torch. So a little bit of chafing there, not too bad. Just check that they're all okay, not perished, so I'm just giving that one, there we go, giving that one a bit of a bend just to see if it's got any cracks in it. Do the same with the oil line, that looks fine. So everything looks old, dusty, cobweb ridden, but okay actually, okay. These rubber boots over the accelerator cable are cracked, but I'm not too concerned about that. As long as we keep them lubricated, it should be alright. I can't actually see any fuel filter at all on this though, and I do, you can see there's the carb and it just goes right up there, so I need to look into whether it's got a filter in the tank. Alright, apologies for the rather abrupt end to that video. That's it for part one of this video on the Yamaha Neo 50 scooter. I hope it was interesting or useful for you if you've got one of these or a similar scooter and you're wanting to do some work on it, get it back on the road, wanting to understand the type of thing that's involved in getting it ready for an MOT test and for safe use on the road. As you can probably tell, this work is not a full restoration. It's about getting it up and running again, but it's not a full restoration, as I say, and there is a limited budget for it. So if you're watching this and thinking, oh, that paint looks a bit scabby, why doesn't he get it repainted? Or that part looks a bit rusty, why doesn't he replace it? Something like that. Then your answer might be to do with the budget available for getting this scooter back up and running. It's a really fun little scooter to ride. I'm used to much more powerful bikes, but notwithstanding that, it's fun to ride, but let's be honest, it isn't worth a great deal. So there's only so much that the owner wants to spend on it to get it into a usable condition again, and I can understand that. So I'm going to split the rest of the work on the scooter across several videos. I'm going to do one about the front end stuff, so removing all the fairing on the front there, changing the brake fluid, lubricating the control cables, freeing up that brake caliper, changing the front tyre and valve, and doing something about those rusty fork legs. Then I'll do another video on the rear end, so to speak, so checking the drive belt. I think it's going to need changing, but I haven't measured it yet, and you don't really know until you have a look at it and measure it. Looking at the rear brakes then, and changing the final drive oil as well. Then I'll do a video on engine and related stuff, so air filter, spark plug, checking the fuel filter, changing the fuel lines, and what else we've got to do? Change the two-stroke oil, because that has been in that tank for a long time, so that needs to come out. And I also suspect it's been run on some pretty crappy two-stroke oil, and I'd rather run it on some decent stuff, which is why I want to change it. Then I'll bring it all together with a summary video. Probably won't video putting it all back together in that much detail, because you've kind of seen that in the taking it apart, so I might sort of speed a lot of that up. I'll tell you how I got on at the MOT, and do a summary of all the costs involved in getting it back on the road. So that brings this video to a close. Thank you very much for joining me. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one. Cheers!